Hello everybody, my name is John and I recently published a tool for Unreal Engine called the Grapple Component. For those who don't know, this is a set of blueprints that allows you to create any sequence where characters are interacting. So essentially when they are sharing an animation and other gameplay logic. Typically these would be things like a stealth takedown or a throw in a fighting game. Essentially any cinematic sequence where characters are interacting. So one thing you may notice in these interactions in the background is that the camera work is looking a bit static, a bit dull if you will. We will attempt to fix this using a feature I call the sequence camera, which allows us to add a bit more life to our grapple sequence by adding movement to our camera, post-process effects, anything to make our sequence more cinematic. And in the background you can have a look at what this will all look like when we are done. So yeah, let's get started with the tutorial. Just as a quick note, this video does assume that you have the Grapple component set up in your project. If you are unsure on how to do that, I will put a link in the description to an earlier guide where I explain how to set up the Grapple component and how to get started with it. For this tutorial, we will be working with the Grapple component content examples. So we should start out by navigating to the example map. You can find it in the content folder, Grapple Component, Content Examples, and Grapple Component Example Map. Let's start out by navigating to our main blueprint object we will be working in for this tutorial. So it's located in the Grapple Component folder, Content Examples, Sample Content, Grapple Sequence, Spinning kick. In here we are specifically looking for the spinning kick grapple sequence. Let's open it up and we should find ourselves in the graph of a function named generate global grapple data. If you're not in this graph already, just double click the function name in the functions tab. Now in here we are going to remove a few nodes. Namely all of these nodes here under the sequence camera section. So just select them all, press delete. We're basically undoing some of the work I did when creating the sample content, just so I can show you how to recreate it in your own way. Let's compile this blueprint and save it. If we play our project now, we will still be controlling the green grapple character, which if it walks up to an opponent and you press the right mouse button, you still initiate the spinning kick grapple sequence. This was already the case by default when we downloaded the grapple component. So this by default also does not do very much, plays some animation, does a bit of damage, but that's basically it. Now we will try adding some flair to this grapple sequence by modifying some of the sequence camera settings. So let's navigate back to our spinning kick grapple object and have a look at what this function actually looks like. So as the function output, we will be generating our global grapple data as usual. This is just all the information the grapple component needs to know how to put these two characters together in an animation in a grapple sequence. Next we have the global grapple data. This is things the two characters have in common. By the way, I'm kind of glossing over this graph because it was already part of a previous tutorial. When we then have a look at our local grapple data, which is the information that is specific to a single character. So in here we have the information for participant 0, which is our attacker, and below we have all of the information, the local grapple data for our participant 1, which is our target. Because the only player-controlled character in our case is participant 0, the attacker, we will only be focusing on this character when creating the sequence camera settings. So as you see here, we are defining different things for our character, repositioning, animation, movement settings, and here you have the sequence camera. Let's drag out from this pin and create a new node of type make struct underscore gc underscore sequence camera data. On this node, you will find a whole bunch of settings. Let's just start by enabling the sequence camera. We can have a look at what this does. It does nothing except for the fact that we cannot control our camera anymore during the grapple sequence. One thing I would like to do to speed up our prototyping a bit is remove these two guys, because if we attack them, we initiate the wrong grapple sequence, because there's two of them. So we'll just delete them and move our other test dummy a bit closer to our spawn location. That way we don't have to run all the way up to it. So our last edit to the sequence camera settings didn't do too much. The only thing that changed is that we couldn't control our camera anymore. Now let's say, for example, we wanted to attach our camera to something during the grapple sequence. We can do this by enabling this attach checkbox and then dragging of this attachment definition pin. We can then make a struct of type gc attachment definition. And this struct allows us to define what we want to attach the camera to. A lot of games attach their cameras to a camera bone that is kind of placed in the animations. This allows animators to have full control over where the camera will be in game. So we could do this if our mesh has a camera bone by selecting the base mesh of our participant 0 as defined here, and then as the socket name putting whatever the bone is you have set as your camera bone. In our case, in the sample content, this is a bone named third person camera. If we now compile and save and test this out, we will see that our camera moves slightly, but it's not really what we want because the camera is looking away. That is because this animation only tells the camera where it should be in world space, but not which direction it should be facing. So we can fix this either by modifying the animation itself or by modifying some of the sequence camera settings. Now, in this case, we will do the latter. Now, to tell your camera where to look, you should first enable this look at focus point checkbox. And then, well, the focus point is kind of, it may be easier if I show this. So it's an array of structs that have the same type as this attachment definition pin right here. So it's basically, you're telling the grapple component, take the average location, for example, of the head of your character 0 and the pelvis. If we compile and save now, we should see that our camera looks at the average location of the head and the pelvis of our character. We could also change this up a bit and make this our character 1. The camera would now look at the average location of the head bone of character 1 and the pelvis bone of character 0. You can see that the camera is already a bit more centered now. What I'm going to do to make the image a bit more steady is to just change both of these values to the pelvis bones of the character. Just because the head bones are moving a bit too much for my liking and the camera is looking kind of shaky. Like this, it's more natural. Another thing you could do to make things look a bit more cinematic is to change the field of view of your camera. You can do this by checking the Effect Field of View checkbox and then filling in a new field of view below. What this will do essentially is zoom the camera in which will add a more cinematic effect. Mostly for gameplay, you have a rather wide field of view so that the player can see more. But for non-interactive sequences, games often narrow the field of view down so things look a bit more close up, a bit more intense. Now, let's say that we didn't want to attach our camera to an animated bone on the base mesh of our character, but would rather have it attached to our usual camera location so that our player can still control the camera with these more cinematic settings applied. We can do this by just changing out this selection type from base mesh to camera component. And now the camera will be attached during our grapple sequence to the regular camera, the one we are controlling right now. But as you can see, we have no control over the camera still. This is because our sequence camera, its location, is still affecting our control rotation. Now, our control rotation is kind of an input from the player, which also, in the case of a third-person character, often drives the actual camera rotation. So if we disable this, our sequence camera will no longer affect the control rotation of our character, and we should be free to move the camera, yes, as we want. One thing I am noticing when playing this grapple sequence is that our camera is pretty low, like it's slightly looking down, which is not that engaging to watch. We can fix this by applying some manual corrections to our focus point. In here, there is a correction offset, so whatever your generated focus point is, based on these bones you specified here, you can apply small corrections to it. Now, 15 does not seem to be enough because our camera is essentially pointing at the root bones of the character, which are located on the floor. We can change this to something like 35 maybe. Let's see how that plays out. So as you can see, the camera is already pointing a bit higher. You can go to the extreme and make this something like 200 to really show the difference. And then, yeah, that's way too high, of course. So I think a nice value should be something like 40. If we play it now, we will see that our camera is kind of nicely on the center. Now let's say that these forms of attachment are not working for you. You don't want to animate the camera based on an animated bone on your character, and you don't want to have it be attached to your regular camera component either. I have built in a way that allows you to animate the camera yourself using what I call animation curves. So these are vector curves that define several properties of the camera, and they basically allow you to freely animate the camera as you want. I will show you this concept by minimizing this window and navigating to my Grapple Component, BP Grapple Component sequence camera folder, and then creating a new asset of type miscellaneous curve vector. And let's call this new anim curve. If we open up this asset, we will see that we have our regular X, Y, and Z curves in here. We can only see one at a time because all three of them are zeroed out right now. But let's start out with the X curve. This curve controls the orbit of our camera. So basically, in what way are we rotating around our character? In world space, this would be a rotation around the Z-axis. So let's just add a new point to this curve, add key, and set its time to 0 and its value to 0 as well. Can now save. Let's head back to our spinning kick grapple sequence and select our newly created new anim curve. Compile and save. Another thing we should do before the anim curve works is disable this attach checkbox. If we play now, we should see that our camera is doing something very special. We still have control over it, but it's kind of frozen in place at a distance of 0, so not what we want really. This is because all of our values on our new anim curve are still set at 0. For example, our camera is right in the face of our character because our distance, which is defined by the z-axis on this curve, is set to 0. We could add a new key and, for example, set our distance at time 0 to 500 and see what this looks like. So we're already having a bit more distance right now, which already looks better. But we could also manipulate our X curve, which allows us to orbit around the character. So for example, if we set this at 45 degrees, you will see that our camera is now angled at 45 degrees. These properties can be animated, of course. For example, if we create a new key for our X curve, for our rotation, and we set the time to 1, which is the end of our grapple sequence. So the timing here is always relative to whatever your grapple sequence is. And we set the rotation here to 10, for example. You will see that the framing of this curve is not optimal. You can fix this by selecting everything with Control A, or not with Control A, just by dragging over the dots. And then pressing this button, zoom to fit, or pressing F on the keyboard. Now our camera should orbit around the character during our grapple sequence, which is indeed what we are seeing. I like to change these curves to the handle types, to user, which allows me to control the movement of these curves a bit more. For example, if you look at it now, it will look a bit smoother. Another thing we can do in our curve editor is hide the X curve, show the Y curve, and once again add 2 keys. Our first key, the time of that should be 0. For our second key, the time should be 1. Once again, this is the beginning of our grapple sequence. This is the end. Let's elevate the camera a bit when we start the grapple sequence. We can do this by setting the value here to 10. And we can put our camera a bit more downwards by the end of a grapple sequence by setting the value here to 5, to -5. Let's zoom out, select everything and press F so our curves are nice and centered. And once again, what I like to do here is right click one of the handles and set the handle type to user. If we have a look at our grapple sequence now, we will see that the height of the camera changes during the animation. Let's say you wanted to create a camera cut in the middle. So we have our 3 curves right here. Let's once again select everything and press F so we can see all of our curves. Let's say that for the X curve, we wanted our camera to switch directions. We could do this by adding a new key. Let's select our X curve first and add a new key. Oh no, this adds it to everything. Yeah, we should hide the other curves first and then add a new key. Now let's set this the point in time for this key to 0.5. And let's actually create yet another key. Where we set our point in time to 0.5 as well. So this will have the value of the curve change instantly. In animation, that would translate to an instant movement, so in our case, a camera cut. Let's just to demonstrate this, set the value here to -10. Once again, these curves will look better if we set them to user. And we should see in the middle of a grapple sequence that there is a camera cut. It looks very bad because this is probably violating a bunch of rules of cinematography, but yeah, I'm going with it, sue me. So yeah, doesn't look very good, but I think this this conveys the idea of the animation curves. I've spent a bit more time perfecting the presets that are already there, so just to make things look a bit better, we will just use our camera curve preset 4. And as you may notice, this one looks a bit better on our grapple sequence. So a lot of games, when creating cinematic sequences, will use what's called a depth of field effect. This is essentially just a blurry background and only the foreground is sharp. It can look really good when you're creating something cinematic. So to do this yourself, you can just drag off this post-process pin on our sequence camera node and select the Make Post-Process Settings node. Now with this one selected, we can head over to our Details panel and type in Depth. Should be enough to bring up the depth of field settings. What we need is the aperture. The focal distance we don't need, but because that one is set automatically. Our depth blur radius, and that should be it. Now let's set our aperture to 0.5 and our depth blur radius to 1. Let's see how this looks. So yeah, quite an aggressive blur effect, but it does the trick. And once again, the sequence camera will automatically set the focal distance based on the focus point we defined here on the left. So with these post-process effects, you can really go all out if you want. I added some depth of field here, but you could, for example, also add monochrome effects, like I did here in the stealth takedown sequence to make it really dramatic. Adding motion blur to the camera would be another example. Essentially, you can just add any post-process effect that you would also be able to add to a regular camera. So you can really go all out if you want. Another thing I would like to talk about are these pins, blend in time and blend out time. These control how long it takes for the player's viewpoint to transition from the player-controlled camera into the sequence camera. When we initiate now, you will see that we have a smooth blending to and from the sequence camera. But if we were to change the blend in time to 0, you will see that there's no blending anymore, there's just a camera cut in the beginning. Same goes if we would change this from 0.25 to 0.6, the blend out time. You will see that it takes a bit longer to transition from our sequence camera back to our player controlled camera. Just a quick edit for those who don't know, you can also add camera shakes to your animation. These add a lot of impact. So just to show you really quick how to do this, let's open an animation montage. You can see here that I have them added already, but it is really simple. So you just right click any notify track, which you can see here, then press add notify and select the anim notify _play camera shake. So, and this basically allows you to select any camera shake you want to use, select a socket name. So this is basically the origin of the camera shake. It should not matter too much, but you can set it as if the shake comes from a certain socket or bone on the character mesh. And you can also set like the basic settings, and in the radius, auto radius, fall off. You could leave those at the default value if you're not sure what they do. And you will see that these can add a lot of drama and punch to your animations as well, which always looks nice. So that will be all for the tutorial on the sequence camera. I hope we all learned something today about how we can make our character interactions look more interesting, alive, and cinematic. Once again, if you are interested in the Grapple component, it is available right now on the Unreal Engine marketplace. Apart from these tutorials, there is a lot of information available on my website johnvandamme.com, where you can find out everything about the Grapple component, how to use it, and what it can do. I am also running a Discord server. It has a dedicated support channel where you can ask questions if you're ever stuck with something or you need help developing something specific. It also has a place where you can show off your work, and more generally, there's a lot of nice and helpful people there, so I definitely recommend checking the server out as well. And with that, I would like to thank you all for watching, and I will see you on the next video. Bye.